At WayScript, we spend a lot of time thinking about developers and the challenges they face, which go beyond the technical. And of course, we wanted to hear from others who also spend time in the developer space and get their perspectives on building a business with devs as an audience. So with that, we are so lucky to have Tom Berger join us today. Tom is a senior executive with over 20 years of experience leading digital marketing teams at a variety of organizations, from early stage startups to high growth SaaS companies to Fortune 1000 companies. He's previously served as the VP or Director of Marketing at DigitalOcean, Progress Software, Iron Mountain, and SafeNet, just to name a few. Tom has tremendous insight into developers as an audience and currently serves as the VP of Marketing at Bolt, the world's first checkout experience form. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Of course. So, you've been selling to devs for quite some time at this point. How has marketing to developers changed over the past few years? And what stayed the same?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for having me. So yeah, from my best experience, one thing it holds true is that developers are lifelong learners. So they're always educating themselves on the latest technologies, languages, etc. And like other consumers today, they expect to be able to try things out before they buy, right? And so kick the tires, so to speak, before committing. And so they like to tinker, they like to play around in dev environments before swiping a credit card or requesting a license. So with that in mind, marketing as well as selling to developers is more about education and less about conversions and response advertising or response marketing and things like that. So companies that do this will focus on things like free educational resources and tutorials. They'll build communities around developers to bring developers together. And so over the past few years, I've seen a number of changes. More communities are sprouting up around specific topics or technologies for developers, whether that's a website or something like Discord, as well as there are these broader communities such as Dev2, which is one that I frequent, which has over 700,000 members in just a few short years, which brings together developers on a variety of topics. All of these are kind of oriented around this notion of education.
Yeah.
So that's been an evolution and a change. And then what's really stayed the same is the education and developers helping other developers through posts, through sharing learnings, creating their own tutorials. And so what all of this means is like user-generated content is very visible and is being created in these communities, which ultimately help the marketer drive engagement, drive more developers to come, and ultimately adoption of new technologies, platforms, languages, etc.
Right. But of course, that's a little scary as a marketer, given that, if you're so reliant on user-generated content, you hope that they're understanding or feeling the same kind of value points that you feel as the marketer.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you're super interesting because you've experienced selling B2B software to both developers as well as non-developers. So I'm curious to see what challenges have you found are unique to developers in particular?
Yeah, so marketers that have to reach developers, we are challenged with reaching and engaging an audience that will use ad blockers, doesn't like to be marketed to or sold to in any way, shape, or form. And so a lot of those traditional channels and methods like paid search, display advertising, social or paid social aren't very effective when it comes to marketing to devs. So what's been most successful for me is creating a very strong inbound go-to-market motion built around this notion of high quality, free educational content. How do I do X? Or look what I've built with X type of content. So building that destination, which I talked a little bit about earlier, with really, solid in-depth tutorials as a way to attract developers and introduce them to software in more kind of authentic and genuine ways is always a win-win. And developers, they'll share what they like. And so if you're providing them with a great tutorial or high quality content, it's high probability they're going to share it with their peers, which is definitely what you want.
Yeah.
And then on the non-developer side, of course, traditional channels, are more effective. But with the changes in how cookies are being tracked and managed, and privacy, and changes with what Facebook and Google are doing, marketers are going to face new challenges of how to reach their target audience. So first-party data is becoming more and more important. And for non-developers, there's also this notion of try before you buy, right? We all live in this kind of networks or Netflix type of world, where trying the software or solution is kind of table stakes. So leveraging free trials, leveraging promotions to get people to try out your software, and even things like referral programs go a long way with kind of the non-dev community, as well as developer community in some respects.
Right. I mean, it sounds like it's all kind of about getting somebody to be comfortable with the software, trying it out beforehand, and even just learning about getting some sort of educational component to
Right. Yeah. Everyone wants to feel, to touch, to experience what that software is going to be. And providing a way to do that is pretty critical.
Right. And when you're looking at these challenges, for example, you mentioned a lot of developers will have ad blocks. And so it's hard, or ad blocking software. So it's tricky to see exactly what they're doing in their page clicks. How do you approach solving these new challenges? Do you run experiments? Do you set up different processes? What is your approach?
Yeah. So two things. So first thing is, that's why I like building a community and attracting developers to your own domain is really important, because at that point, then you can remarket to them and they are engaged in some way, shape, or form, rather than relying on third-party data. So first-party data is really important. Collecting that data in brand appropriate ways is important. For experimentation, I think all marketers these days, it's important to kind of build within your team this kind of test and learn type of culture, where you focus on rapid iterations on messaging or designs or call to actions. All of that's very important. And so, for developers, this could be more about adding and testing, more native type call to actions within a tutorial versus testing added creative. With that said, I like to kind of group things when I'm thinking about testing out something for an ad campaign or a landing page, or even a tutorial for developers. I kind of put them into two different buckets. There's when it comes to experiments, there's the iterative bucket, and then there's the innovative bucket. And the iterative are those kind of quick ideas on testing a hypothesis to change one or two elements to see what the lift is. And then the innovative kind of group is really about turning things on their head, challenging the status quo, and approaching things from a completely, different perspective. So constantly coming up with what those challenges are, or what those challengers are, I should say, is important. With that said, I do also feel that, a lot of marketers sometimes go through this period of like over testing, where everything has to be tested so we can show, the results of all of our hard work. And, I come from the camp that everything doesn't need to be tested. Some things are just common sense. And we can't get into this fear of not testing something and, get into this like, action or testing paralysis that sometimes marketers fall into.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced that myself. And I have to remind myself, it's a developer. And so the challenges may be unique, but at the end of the day, it's still just a person, and so there are certain things that are just going to be universally true and not. When you're thinking about the iterative versus innovative testing kind of approach, how do you think about confining almost like the blast radius? Let's say, especially if you do something innovative and maybe that's not the right approach, or the results aren't as great. how does that factor into your?
Yeah, I mean, well, you always want to limit the pool and the audience. You don't want to disrupt things. Like if you have a good, let's say, campaign running or marketing program running, you want to expose that any innovative or type of experiment. You want to expose that to just a smaller percentage of your users, and so that's why it's really important to have really high volume of traffic and inbound visitors that you can pull into a test. So just restricting the pool, targeting the pool that you're experimenting with is certainly key.
And restricting it. That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, of course, that you try to drive. You're thinking about your marketing team in this test and learn type of phase. Are there tools that you use to help facilitate that within the organization itself, or even just broadly? I'm curious about your tool stack overall.
Yeah. So these days there's a number of tools out there to do these types of tests. I've used in the past, platforms like Optimizely, Google Optimize, and then also just simply using Google Tag Manager to run tests. For outside of experimentation, usually the tech stack that I'm working with is some sort of open source or headless content management system or WCM. Then most of the companies I worked for are large enough that we have platforms like Marketo for email, Salesforce for CRM, and then managing data between all these different things are solutions like Segment come into play. So yeah, off the top of my head, I think those are the key ones. It really comes down to what makes the most sense for your business at that time and stage of where you are. So prior to getting to like the Marketo or Salesforce and that growth stage, maybe it's something more like, a HubSpot or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's obviously a litany of tools out there that you're able to plug in and work to your purpose, but are there tools you wish you had, or is there a particular functionality that you wish you could, automate?
Yeah, I don't know about functionality, but one of the things that's always a challenge within marketing is we're collecting data across so many different channels, so many different sites, including our own site. But if you think about like social channels and all the data that's collected there, the lead capture data, data is everywhere. And so aggregating all of that data into one repository so that you can visualize that data and kind of glean those insights to help you make decisions, whether that's on a test or a different program you want to run, is really important. And I think that's still kind of a big gap for a lot of marketers and a lot of marketing organizations. So yeah, I mean, if I were to say, what are those tools that I'm still looking for or trying to get my hands around early on when I start a new engagement or start with a new company, it's how do we take all of this data all of this great data, first party data that we're generating and turn it into actionable insights. Right. It's easy enough to create reports on individual platforms, right? But bringing it all together so that you can make sound business decisions based on what your users or visitors are doing across all of these different channels, sometimes escapes us and marketers. So those are things that I'm most interested in today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's that last mile data problem of
okay,
we've generated it all, but now what do we do with it? How do we interpret it?
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
I love that. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you, Tom. Any last words or any last thoughts on developers as a space, on marketing towards the developers in general?
Yeah. I mean, I think just to summarize kind of what I said at the beginning of our chat was, and this goes for devs and non-devs. I mean, I think we're in a world now where, the clickbaity type content, is not very successful and is not really driving the best type of traffic that marketers need. At the end of the day, sales needs. I tend to rely and focus on, much meatier thought leadership and very valuable content. And always, whenever possible, offer that up for free without gating it. Good things happen, right? So in the developer space, it's always around things like tutorials and those deeper dives into how you use the platform, then high level, top funnel kind of clickbaity type blog posts. So that's where my energies are focused, and that's where I try to focus the team, and good things happen from there.
I love that.